What's up guys, CT Kidney here, and today we're going to be rocking some WoW TBC Classic again. This time we're going to be taking a look at the Assassination Rogue. Much like my previous video on the Shadow Priest, which by now has reached 100 views, so thanks for that, that's pretty hype. I'm going to be taking a look at Assassination and trying to figure out what its weaknesses are and how we might be able to improve the spec. Currently, Assassination is very underplayed, providing little to no raid utility and not doing anywhere near competitive DPS. This is where the concept is going to differ from my last video, because unlike Shadow Priest, there is actually no reason to bring an Assassination Rogue over any other melee class. The only thing they have that could be offered as a counter-argument is improved exposed armor. However, combat rogues can just take this same talent and do much more damage. To clarify, the reason you would bring Shadow Priest in my last video is because they have the mana battery. Assassination doesn't really offer anything like that. So I'm gonna attempt to come up with some way to make Assassination competitive. A couple caveats, as with the last video, I won't be copy pasting any changes from Wrath or any future expansions because I feel like that's just such a cop out and it's just not fun. I won't be slapping any epic raid utility onto the Assassination tree because I feel like that's just as much of a cop-out. If they have some crazy good utility, of course you're gonna bring them. And also, that doesn't change anything about the actual spec itself and how it's played. The last thing is, I won't just be arbitrarily increasing damage numbers of the abilities by a giant percentage to make up for the loss of damage, because again, it's not fun, and it doesn't actually change anything about the spec. Alright, now that we've got all that out of the way, why is this spec underperforming so much? I don't know why someone thought Vigor was a good idea. I mean, 10 energy is only good at the start of the fight, or if you have some downtime in the fight and you're capping on energy, otherwise you're not even going to notice this is there. Improved poisons, it's just a flat 10% chance to apply your poisons, and poisons have their own huge issues, which I'll get into later, but a flat 10% chance is not worth 5 whole talent points to invest into. Cold Blood is a trash 3-minute cooldown. When you compare it to every other 3-minute cooldown that other classes have, like Death Wish or Avenging Wrath, hell, even Bestial Wrath, which is only a 2-minute cooldown, is way better. It just doesn't make any sense why Cold Blood is a 3-minute cooldown for just a free crit. Sure, it has some synergy with the actual spec with Seal Fate, because the more you crit, the more combo points you get, but a 3-minute cooldown for a crit is just not useful. Melee auto attacks is where Assassination actually gets most of its issues from, so the abilities of Assassination actually do about the same damage as other melee abilities, as we can tell from the comparison between these two logs. So we can see that they're both 95 percentile, they both have the same buffs, the same consumables, the same fight time, but one is Assassination and the other is combat. We can see that the abilities, like I said, mostly do the same damage. Sure, Assassination does a little bit less, but that's fine. Where the bulk of the damage difference comes in is auto attacks. So why is this? Other melees have a majority of their damage from melee auto attacks or melee synergistic abilities, such as Wind Fury, Paladin Seals, Sword Specialization, Combat Potency, and Flurry. Or they have some generic stat increase to make them hit harder with their melee attacks, like Improved Berserker Stance, Weapon Mastery, Naturalist, Heart of the Wild, and Vengeance. Assassination doesn't really get any stat increases or any auto attack buffs. The only thing they get is 20% increased damage to poisons and 10% increased chance to apply poisons, like I mentioned before. The compensation you get for being a primarily ability-based melee talent tree is not nearly enough. The Assassination tree actually has very minimal stat increases applicable to auto attacks, with only Malice and Find Weakness being the ones that actually buff your autos. The only other form of auto attack synergy that they get is to poisons, like I said before, have their own issues, which I'll get into now. Poisons don't scale with any stat, except technically haste, because the more haste you have, the more you attack and the more chance you get to apply your poisons. Envenom is totally useless over Eviscerate, and it's pretty obvious that Eviscerate was supposed to actually be the combo point spender for Assassination, but it just doesn't do nearly as much damage, and the downside is horrible. The downside of Envenom is that you have to actually consume your deadly poison stacks as well as the combo points. poisons are typically only put on the offhand because the main hand can't have both poison and Wind Fury. This means that they are mutually exclusive, and you don't really want to put a poison on the main hand when you could get a much better enhancement in Wind Fury. Lastly, Assassination has to use daggers to use Mutilate, and daggers are the weakest of all melee weapons in terms of damage. For those of you who don't know or don't play melee, similar with spell coefficients, daggers are very fast weapons, so they don't do a lot of damage when they hit, whereas two-handed weapons or slower one-hander weapons do more damage when they hit in compensation for them being slower. Having a combo point spender that costs you your stacks of poison that you spend at least 10 points of talents into is just fucking feels bad. But Eviscerate just does more damage regardless, even without considering the fact that you have to lose your poison stacks to use Envenom. Eviscerate just does more damage. Daggers being the lowest weapon in the game and having a spec that revolves primarily around weapon damage for your abilities like Mutilate and Eviscerate makes it feel much worse. Between using the weakest weapons in the game in a weapon-based spec and consuming poisons that you spend 10 talent points on, this spec is counterproductivity at its finest. Unlike my Shadow Priest video, I won't be taking a look at the talents first because the biggest issue of this spec doesn't actually come from the talents, it comes from just the baseline things that I mentioned. For one, because there are just so many issues with the baseline I need to address first before I can even get into the talents. You may notice I didn't really talk about gear like I did in my last video, but that's because gear is actually pretty good for Assassination Rogues. They don't really have any glaring issues. Because Seal, Fate, and Lethality make it so that crit is invaluable for this spec, and as mentioned before, haste means more poison applications. The only thing that falls kinda short is attack power, because poisons don't scale with them, and there's no built-in amplifiers like other melee talent trees have. Alright, with all of that out of our way, how do we fix the spec? My first change would be to Envenom, which was supposed to be the baseline combo point spender, but just gets overshadowed by Eviscerate due to its downside and its lack of damage. Now, before I get any comments, I just want to say that I know the most obvious fix would just be to make it so that Envenom doesn't consume the deadly poison stacks. However, this was a talent in Wrath of the Lich King, so I've decided to go against it for the sake of not copy-pasting solutions, like I said in the beginning of the video. Instead, I've decided to lean towards consuming the deadly poison stacks, but making it worthwhile to do so. Envenom will now give you 5 energy for each dose of deadly poison you've consumed. Paired with the Remorseless Strikes talent means that if you consume 5 doses and 5 combo points, you get 50 energy back, making it so that you have much more Mutilates. Much more Mutilates, which generate much more combo points and in return allow you to use more abilities to account for the lack of damage you get from auto attacks. Next up, instant poison scales with attack power at a base rate of 10%. I mean, this is pretty simple. It's not a huge damage compensation for the auto attacks, but it does help a little bit. Keep in mind that the application rate is still the same, but the damage simply increases a little. But for reference, if you're in full best in slot gear as a phase 2 rogue, typically you'll have about 18 to 1900 attack power without procs or consumables. So this would increase the damage of instant poison by roughly 185 to 200. Deadly poison does its remaining damage when consumed by Envenom. This change is pretty much just a fix to make it so that consuming the Envenom stacks doesn't feel bad, and it makes it so that if you have even 1 stack of deadly poison, then Envenom will out-damage Eviscerate. This combined with the previous change should make it so that Envenom is well worth hitting. That's all I've got for the baseline changes. You may be saying, but Kidney, what about the Wind Fury thing you mentioned? Well, so I've decided that Wind Fury in the main hand makes sense baseline if you're a combat rogue because you would likely want it. However, in the updated Assassination talent tree, I've tried making it so that it's worthwhile using poisons over Wind Fury, but we'll see what happens. So without further ado, let's get to the talents. Improved poisons. When you have both instant and deadly poison applied, the chance to apply them is increased by 10%, and the damage of instant poison is increased by 50%, and deadly is increased by 35%. This change, as mentioned above, was geared towards making it so that you want to use poisons instead of Wind Fury. Increasing the damage that instant poison does makes it so that you want both instant and deadly together. And this would likely outdo Wind Fury. This change also buffs the new Envenom since it does the remaining damage of deadly poison, and this talent improves the damage of deadly poison. Vigor is changed to be a passive 10% energy regen instead of just 10 flat energy. This makes this talent so much more useful throughout the course of a fight. Instead of needing to cap on energy so that this talent makes use, it's now just a constant energy gain. So this would mean that instead of getting 20 energy every tick, you get about 22 every tick, which might not seem like a huge increase, but remember that's every 1.5 seconds, meaning that over the course of a minute, you'll get roughly 40 extra energy, meaning you basically just used a Thistle Tea every minute. As for Cold Blood, it will increase your critical strike chance by 25% for 15 seconds. This keeps the original style of Cold Blood alive with the crit chance, and paired with Puncturing Wounds further up the tree, it would make it so that while active, Mutilate has a 40% crit chance. Effectively doing the same thing Adrenaline Rush does on the combat tree of allowing more abilities to be cast for a short period of time due to the synergy with Seal Fate, but making it so that you get more combo points instead of more energy. And as I said earlier, gear doesn't really seem like an issue for Assassination. They seem to scale very well with it. So I'm not really gonna have a whole section on it. And as mentioned before, we don't really need a gear section because unlike with Shadow Priest, Assassination is able to benefit from every single stat very well. So we're not gonna have a gear section. And these are all the changes that I've got for Assassination. I think the increased focus on poison and ability usage is going to make up for the difference of any stat modifiers or auto attack damage. It definitely makes their intended combo point Spender and Venom feel much better to use with the increased damage from consuming deadly poison, as well as the added energy you get from consuming. Let me know what you think. Would these changes be too much? Not enough? What do you think you need to do to fix Assassination in TBC? I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see y'all next time.